Welcome to Eden Cemetery for our the OcTrolleyFest for this year, 2024. And the theme that we're having here at Eden, where you'll be a part of the 90,000 citizens of Eden. Eden is a cemetery of cemeteries, and we have from the 19th century through today notable burials, because it also includes churchyards and other institutions. For the OcTrolleyFest today, what we're going to explore is the right to ride, taking it to the streets. And what we would like to do is be able to take you through the history of when African Americans in Philadelphia in particular weren't able to ride the new trolley cars in the 1850 that came into being in 1850s. So what we'll do is hit a couple of those who were engaged in that actual quote unquote another form of citizenship rights, expressing citizenship rights by taking you to certain places and locations of individuals that are buried here, who were actually engaged in that petitioning, legislative, and also direct action to have so African Americans to be able to ride the trolley cars in Philadelphia. It's two things I'm working on. The general topic is the right to ride, taking it to the streets. That's our topic. And what I wanted to do was place it in the context of W.E.B. Du Bois did two. He did more. He was prolific, but because he did the Philadelphia Negro, which is done in the latter part of the 1800s, the 19th century, he looked at the history of Black Philadelphia, the sociological history. I think that's important. But the other thing that he did in the 1930s was the Black Reconstruction. And what is, the whole thing about trolleys and the trolley ride is that when trolleys came into being in Philadelphia, African Americans weren't able to ride. And the reason I'm trying to bring those two together, and anybody can stop me, I know we're kind of time constrained, but what I want to do is be able to say, because what he put in is two things that he placed in the Black Reconstruction. Abolitionist democracy was one, and the point of the general strike, which was when those who were enslaved walked off the plantations as a military strategy, right? And a part of the African American military strategy, or what would become African American military strategy, because remember, during the Civil War, there was no 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. So citizenship. But it becomes a tactical move that was as a tactical strategy that you see during the trolley experience of Philadelphia in the 1850s. Through the 1860s, trolleys came into being in Philadelphia in 1854.
Well, 1858 they came to Derby.
Right. And so here you have where the direct action is manifesting itself. The same type of tactic that was used during the Civil War, when those who were on those plantations walked off the plantation. So that's what I wanted to be able to do. Now, the reason why I wanted to contextualize it into abolitionist democracy, because we know in Pennsylvania, by 1837, from the framing of the Pennsylvania Constitution, men with property, and that's how the Constitution wrote, right? Yeah. Men with property had the opportunity to vote. By the 1830s, 1837, then only white men with property could vote. So from that point on, in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, the notables the few that we'll be able to shoot that was directly connected to trolley was being able to demonstrate citizenship. Citizenship was an important thing. So from 1835 to 1858, when the first trolleys, African Americans have been in different levels of the dealing with the that constitutional change in relationship to citizenship rights, right? Now, this is before the Civil War,
Yes.
right? That this transition and this campaign take it. Now, the one thing that's interesting to me, when we talk about 1837, we're talking and that fight for abolitionist democracy, that demonstration towards abolitionist democracy, and utilizing the whole thing of direct action as far as what happens in relationship to the petitioning, the lobbying, and doing the direct action is the point of that these African Americans are trying to transform, not just to get citizenship, but transform the government in the sense of being able to recognize that abolitionism or anti-slaveryism in America, or supporting slavery in America was not something that should be done. American democracy shouldn't have a slaveocracy, right? Yes. As a part of its structure. And so what we see is that they had to, because of the legal aspect being changed as far as citizenship, what is also has to be changed is the cultural. Now, Philadelphia, as it relates, Philadelphia was, some people call Philadelphia up, or Pennsylvania up south.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. There's that, but there are also the Quakers.
Right. Now, and that's why the point of abolitionism, but looking at it from the lens of the citizens of Eden, because from its inception of enslavement, because Pennsylvania did have from 1688 until 1780, when you had the Gradual Abolitionist Act, Pennsylvania did reinforce the enslavement of Africans. So, and the Quakers controlling the legislative body was a part of that, even though they had internal friction over 100 years it took before they actually denounced slavery in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So, but for African Americans, abolitionism was a continuous from day one, right? So that's why I like to, for the citizens here, to center it in from the perspective of how African Americans in this here now transition of demonstrating citizenship, and which was taken away from them. So we move to towards 1837, which is interesting too, because the Supreme Court Justice John Fox, he writes in his opinion in order to change that, because African Americans were participating in the elections. It was because of their participation in the election that was they felt that was a danger. So John Fox was now, in a legal opinion, was making the case, the first case, of why African Americans are not citizens, right? And at that point it would be why Africans are not citizens, because and then that is his opinion becomes the basis of later on of the Dred Scott decision, right? So I think that's important to contextualize. But as we move, we come into the point of the 1850s. 1850s is, as you said, John, trolleys. You had different types of buses, what they call them, omnibus.
Yep.
Before that, before the trolleys. And it's interesting, and we're going to pause here because we're, up here we'll move to William Still, which he writes the first. Well, it's not the first, but because in 1854 in New York, you have Elizabeth Graham, who actually sues to have rights on the bus in New York, right? In 1854. But what is happening in the 1850s in Philadelphia, which I find is interesting. We got the police force being established. We have the Consolidation Act of, you know, the expansion of the city. And we also have, by 1857, the Dred Scott decision, which relates back to Fox, which relates back to 1837, which relates back to Pennsylvania, which relates back to citizenship, which relates to why the whole thing of the direct action. So we have two generations by 1857, right?
And I think at that point, Philadelphia had the largest population of free people of color.
Right, exactly. And that makes it, you know, the question we bring up is the relative question about what is freedom. Because here,
well, even today there are two definitions.
Right. And even at that time, because if you're a citizen, right, you should have all rights of citizenship. And that would be to tie to the notion of freedom. But if you're a citizen and you don't have the right to participate in the electoral process, how free are you, right? And when that can be actually changed, because it wasn't like it didn't exist. So what I want to, and so by the 1850, the late 1850s, and now that, which I found was interesting, right? The trolley car, as the movement of this new technology to move people, and you know, because now look, Philadelphia is a funky place, right? Yeah, I mean,
It has been.
you know what I mean, in the sense of when it rains, you got mud because there's no real roads, and when you're the horses that are driving the omnibus and the horses that are moving the carriages, and then you have the trade that's coming in from the waterfront. You got a lot of stuff that's just around, so you got a lot of fun, and people didn't want to ride in it. I mean, walk in that, and so. What is happening is that as we move from, and I'll call it technology, right? The technology of the omnibus, because the streetcars now are putting rails to move trolleys, right? They're putting these rails in. But before they put the rails in this, it seems that there's a debate going on as they're asking for these private businesses. Now remember, we have the government has already said address black citizenship in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. That's the government. Now you have private concern, a private business. And in that private business, it's saying black people can't ride. If they ride, if they would, you know, as they're putting these new lines in the system, their culture of opposition to black folks already exists, right? To where they're not allowed by culture, not necessarily by law, but by culture not to ride, because private concerns could determine who can be able to ride. The other thing is when these new trolleys come on, who is riding them? Primarily those who live on the outskirts of the city, who wants to come in the city, because they can afford it. You know, they have the funds, and they're the ones who are getting on. So here you have a new system come in place. But let me back up, because I thought it was interesting, the political back and forth about trolleys. Because one thing they were saying, the trolleys were moving on Sunday. And they didn't want trolleys moving on Sunday because it made a lot of noise. And church services were going on. So it was a lot of political debate for these new companies to try to come online. I think it was about 18 companies came online in Philadelphia, or at least two came online in Philadelphia. So that becomes a major political debate for the companies to be able to overcome the resistance. And those are primarily European Americans who are up in arms about the noise and about not obeying the ordinances of having, because really the city kind of shut down on Sunday, because it's really all the churches, the city shut down. So here the company wants to be able to move people on Sunday, and they're making all this noise. So that goes through the political process, right? That's for the trolleys that come online. Then, you have this whole cultural aspect of this abolitionist democracy, and where we're now pushing for, we need the right to ride too. Now we're talking about the 1850s. We're talking about the Republican Party coming online, and we talked about the city consolidation. One section of the city consolidation was Southwalk. What's so interesting about the Southwalk section? Because on one side, you have the Scott Irish working poor, and on the other side, you have, which is around 6th and Lombard, in that area is where the territory, the section, they become a part of it, and they want to run a trolley line up Lombard Street. Now, here comes again the politics. I'm interested in the politics as it relates to trolleys because citizenship is about politics, right? Citizenship is about the party's engagement. So what we have, William Still, he writes an article in the North American paper talking about how the legislature should do something about this having access. Now we're talking about 1858. 1859 is when William Still writes this article in the paper. You have these black abolitionists, who are engaged in lobbying their legislature, because they're still, from the 1830s on to the 1850s, they are constantly advocating for citizenship rights. Like, this is where Du Bois's abolitionist democracy demonstrates itself. They're advocating, they're not going to arms. They're doing what we, African American, they're petitioning the government, right? They're using moral suasion, right? They're writing articles, as William Still, to say this practice, even by private concerns, is not comparable
to the idea of democracy. William Still petitioned to desegregate the streetcars.
Right.
I think was about 1858.
Right.
People of color could not ride inside the cars. They had to ride on the platform.
Right.
Regardless of the weather. And yes, it's an ongoing struggle.
And that brings us to, so they're creating organizations, and I wanted to come back to be able to bring up about the politics of it, because at this point now, already the Union League and the Republican Party is formulating, right? The Republican Party is more subtly anti-slavery, right? Or what they call it, the radical Republicans, right? But in Pennsylvania, one of the persons who owned one of the paper that William Still wrote that article in 59, McMichael, I think his name is, Morton McMichael, who later becomes a mayoral candidate in 1865. But he owns the American, that newspaper that William Still puts this article in. And so he's always been somewhat reflective about he being McMichael, of he's anti-slavery, but he's not really pro-desegregation, or he's not outwardly, not like one of the persons he has becomes an opponent, Daniel Fox, who is opponent, when they were running for mayor in the mayoral election. So here we are, and I'm just bringing out Still because he becomes a part of that, a symbol of that first generation in relationship to the streetcars. But now we hear the rumors of the war going on, right?
Well, you have the Fugitive Slave Law in 1850.
Right.
Which I believe there was a personal liberty law in Pennsylvania. If someone brought an enslaved person into Pennsylvania, that slave could claim freedom. And one of the things that William still does work with Passmore Williamson in the liberation of Jane Johnson in 1855.
Right.
And then there was a trial afterward, was sort of like the OJ trial of the day, where Passmore refused to say where Jane Johnson was taken, and pissed off Judge John Kinsing Kane, who threw him to Moy-Mensing prison for 100 days.
Passmore is an interesting point. And what I want to do is move down here to where we move to Octavius Cotto and the next generation, where I'm making a distinction, right, from writing as a means of demonstrating abolitionist democracy, influencing the legislators as a means of abolitionist democracy, and then direct action as it relates to trolley cars. The whole thing of challenging streetcars through direct, and that's one thing that that William still had a challenge with. I'm gonna call them the Young Turks, right? Octavius Cotto and them, because he felt that direct action against the trolley cars would be insinuating, to the general public. I just wanted to make the connection between the direct action of the 1860s with the Octavius and Carroll and Kant and others, and the direct action in Montgomery in 1960, using the same action as far as the
Rosa Parks.
Right. So we have 100 years of a strategy being used by an abolitionist democracy strategy in order to get private concerns, because it was a private concern then too, right? In order to deal with, the racial bias, the cultural racial bias that exists. I just thought that was an interesting point to raise, that, this process of riding trolleys or buses, and the discrimination or the lack of citizenship rights. And the thing that Octavius brings, in this here, because, as deal with the politics of this, and you deal with the actual lobbying and direct action, is that the continuation of organizations, because Octavius Cato becomes the secretary for Pennsylvania of the Equal Rights League, right? This is 1865, right? So while this campaign is going on to get access to the trolleys, while the Civil War is going on, and that's where you see women like Carolyn LeConte. Now, I have to, because I find it difficult for me to find. I think that's her stone over there. I have. Oh, here it goes. Because what she symbolized, her, and we'll move over to now. Frances Ellen Watkin Harper, is that how much the women were involved. Because remember, by the 1860s, what's happening while this here trolley, campaign is going on? The war is going on, and African American soldiers are being trained and being harmed and brought back, and the women want to go to the places where the hospital where they're centered.
And I believe John Pierre Burr was one of the signers of the call to arms.
And John Pierre Burr, who is also buried in the Celestine section, is buried there, and they have a headstone for him. He became, at one point in the 1830s, was the president of the what they call the colored conventions, which again we can see the organizing. That's another emphasizing of this, lack of voting rights does not take away from African Americans the organization of citizens, the organizing and creating. So here you have Octavius, him and Jacob White, they become part of the Equal Rights League, and you have Carolyn LeConte and other women. Well, that's the like the women activism, because it's the women who are saying they want to go see their husbands and sons, and they can't ride, and they're the ones that are organizing these types of, I don't know if I want to call them protests. I don't know what to call them. I don't know what's the language, the word, because and I don't know if direct action really captures the broader context. Yes, they did something that's direct, and that's what William Still was like concerned, because the hostility in the city is not something to take lightly. When they go on rioting, when they going down to burn up churches and schools, whole communities are being devastated of African Americans by these individuals who are anti-black, want their own self-preservation, political self-preservation, because that was a major concern. Their economic self-preservation, these cultural biases, because the people who are on these trolleys are conductors. They're the ones who are saying you can't get on. They're the ones that are, and they're just workers. They're not public officials. They have to go and get the police. And one thing I have to say, because some of the women, they fought back, obviously, because the conductor couldn't hold her back. The police, it took a while before that. And I just wanted to emphasize that, because it shows the level of commitment and tenacity, and it also shows how the war effort is taking place, not just in the South, but in the city of Philadelphia and over private concern. We can walk over to Francis and move in there, but that's what primarily kind of looking at. We're now as we wrap up, what I wanted to do to end with I really, if I could go back in time, I would get hook up with Francis and see if she let me, we can do something. I know that they have more thing about dating and marriages, but she's my girl. But what I wanted to what I wanted to do was emphasize that she utilized her skills, and remember that Francis lived with William Still for a while. So her influence, his influence on her, and her influence on him in relationship to his work. But what I wanted to do was back up in relationship again to show how this trolley, what we're trying to do in this October TrolleyFest is to be able to demonstrate using the citizens of Eden, and I have said earlier how Eden is a cemetery of cemeteries, primarily two large cemeteries, which is Olive, which came into existence in the 1850s, and Lebanon, which also came into existence. Because remember, in Philadelphia, you could not be buried unless you belonged to a church. So the cemetery movement comes a little later, but here now you have church cemeteries, which we have, like the last one we just placed was African Harmony Church, which was moved from West Philadelphia, and we have cemeteries, as mentioned about the Philadelphia, and that was because by the 1900s, Philadelphia, in its renovation of the Southwark area, those cemeteries were becoming dilapidated, and the founders of Eden, the 5 founders of Eden, worked towards moving them here. But what happens here is we get the lives of individuals like Francis Ellen Watkins Harper, who actually were engaged in this, the writing aspect of writing about the desegregation, the need for desegregation of trolley cars, who were advocating to women groups the need for for their input in the desegregation of trolley cars, and utilizing their whatever commitment in organizing other women of color, as they say, in order to deal with the desegregation of trolley cars. And from the 1860s, like we have 3 court cases in 1861, Goins versus McCandless, Goins got thrown off 1865, and this is the elderly woman, Darby versus Laurie, as a court case that was in relationship to the trolley cars. And also in 1867, Westchester and Philadelphia Railroad versus Miles. So all the way through and after the Civil War, we have the advocacy of the desegregation, and eventually those trolley cars, the owners relented. So, which now the owners now is letting the conductors know that they cannot no longer officially remove or allow not allow black Philadelphians to be able to sit on the trolley car. And I just wanted to maybe stop there. And this is a work in progress, and I think it's an important work.
Yeah.
And why? And therefore, I'm glad, John, that y'all do the October, TrolleyFest, because as I mentioned earlier, that here's now 100 years later, for not just black Philadelphians, but blacks in the South. When we talk about Montgomery, we talk about Rosa Parks, and black women engagement.
Frances Ellen Watkins Harper gave a speech to a women's convention, which Elizabeth Cady and Stanton shared the stage, called "We're All Bound Up Together," where she spoke about our common humanity, and someone should not be known by the curl of their hair, which I think sort of is a precursor to Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. I mean, we all have the same dream. We all work for the same boss.
That's been the battle. But I like to thank everyone for attending. This is something that we are continuously will be building on. So John, I know Eden would be definitely interested in continuing the engagement and continuing the development. I appreciate everybody for showing up. Thank you.